So thank you so much for joining. This is our 8th session, which is so unbelievable. And we have one more session left for next week. I'm so excited today to have Andrea Paquette with me. And her and I are going to talk about what we wish our parents knew about bipolar disorder. So I am going to introduce Andrea more fully, but I thought maybe today, since we have a really nice intimate group here, if we can just do a really quick grounding exercise together. Also, is because my dog ran away from his dog walker and I still don't know where he is at the moment. So I feel like I could really use a grounding exercise so that I can be fully present here with you all today. So if you could just sit comfortably, and if you could just put your right hand at your heart, and let's just take a few deep and cleansing breaths together. So breathe in through your nose and out. Feel your body relax. Notice any tension spots and just let that melt away. Second breath in and out. One last breath in and out. And whenever you're ready, just open your eyes and join me again. I don't know if you noticed, but even just breathing 3 times like that can really shift your energy quite a bit. So I wanted to first talk about Maggie, as always. So Maggie is my friend who died by suicide. And she's the reason and inspiration for me to start this Live Talk series, because I wanted to fundraise for her in benefit of Hong Fook Mental Health Association, who focuses on the Asian community's mental health. And I usually talk about a quick, cute story about Maggie. So today I want to share that she really likes pandas. And I remember when we first met, and I own a Mandarin school called Panda Mandarin, so we have a lot of pandas. And one day she said, I want that biggest panda you have there, which is our logo converted into a stuffed animal. And I said, you can't have that. That's like our mascot. And she's like, but I really want it. And after she passed, I felt really sad that I didn't give her the panda. And when I went to visit her in the mausoleum, although her ashes weren't actually there, I brought a panda with me to leave there for her, which is now probably cleaned up by the staff because she wasn't actually there. But it was just something that I always remember. So now every time I see panda, I think of her as well. And all the photos in my slides of me are taken by Maggie. And she's also the one that did my hair and makeup as well. So yeah, so you have an opportunity to donate to the Hong Fook Mental Health Foundation if you're up for it. It's in this link. It's always included in the emails that I sent out. So what can you expect today? I am so excited to have Andrea. I've been a fangirl of hers for a while now, and we finally connected, and she miraculously was free today to be on this talk with me. So I'm really, really glad. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful to Stuart Gershman, who is the founder of Buddy Check for Jesse, to have connected me and Andrea. So we're going to do a little introductions, and then Andrea is going to jump right into our discussion about parents. And I know some of you might have this as a thought that, whether you want to better support your teens, or you might want to reflect back on how you were parented and what that effect was on you. So this is kind of that discussion that we'll have today. And of course, Q&A as always. And I I'm also going to be launching a Courage Circle for caregivers, because initially I thought, oh, everybody come together, caregivers and people with lived experience. But after doing 4 weeks of the Courage Circle now for people with lived experience, I realized it's probably best to separate the two groups. So I'm going to be launching one for caregivers, which will be starting in June. So I'll send more information out about that. So now here's a little bit about Andrea. Andrea lives with bipolar disorder, and she was diagnosed when she was 25 years old. But that didn't stop her from doing some incredible, incredible work. So she is now the president and co-founder of Stigma Free Society, which was formerly named Bipolar Disorder Society of BC. She is a creator of the Bipolar Babe Project. And isn't she such a babe? Like, seriously, look at the red hair. Actually, when I first found Andrea, the funny story is my husband's like, that is an awesome name, but now you can't be the bipolar babe anymore. And I was like, no, I don't want to be the bipolar babe. Andrea is definitely the bipolar babe. So that was really cool. And so Andrea is very passionate about educating the community around stigma surrounding mental health. She is an award-winning mental health activist, sorry about the typo, activist, speaker, and author. And she has presented her story to more than 800 schools. So that's thousands and thousands of people that was able to really understand and hear about bipolar disorder and mental health. So really, really grateful to her for doing that kind of work. And she has so many awards. I had to like choose. I said, Andrea, I can't fit it all into this one slide. Okay, I'm just gonna like choose maybe the top 4. I hope that's okay. So she won the 2019 award for President's Commendation from the Psychiatric Association of Canada. And she also got the Courage to Come Back Award, plus top 20 under 40. And in 2020, she was featured in a CBC documentary. What was the documentary about, Andrea?
You Can't Ask That is the title of the series on CBC, and it's all about one episode was about bipolar disorder specifically, and then people can ask us anything they want. So pretty interesting.
Oh, that is very cool. Awesome. Well, you'll definitely be hearing more from Andrea in just a moment. So here's a little bit about me. I think everybody here already has seen this, but I did add 2 fun facts, mostly because our guest speaker last week had all these fun facts. And I said, that's a great idea. I'm going to add a couple of different fun facts. And so for me, you know, I love paddleboarding, but I can't swim, which has always been an interesting thing for people to know, because that's technically not something you do when you don't know how to swim. And I have found my goal in life, and it is to be super chill. I have a lot of great role models in my life who are very much super chill. So I have made that my new goal in life, is I want to be super chill. So I'm a mom to one amazing girl, and I realized I actually didn't put my dog in there, because I'm a like committed dog mom. I might be a little bit distracted today because I'm checking my phone to make sure that they found him, because he ran away from his dog walker. Those of you who are joining after I was sharing about this, and I had a bit of a interesting career path from being an engineer to a high school teacher, then to a serial entrepreneur. And now what I do mostly is corporate training, coaching, speaking, and yeah, sorry, I was like, did they find him yet? So then I wanted to go actually with my husband, but I was like, I can't leave all of you stranded, you know? So I said, well, I'll be there the best way I can, but I just might be a bit distracted. And so I, of course, lived with bipolar disorder for 23 years and 2 hospitalizations, including one that just happened last summer. And then 4 years of disability leave for all of my professional years. So you're definitely in the right place, which I know you all are. But I just want to have to say this because people who are watching after our session, I just want to make sure that they know what they're expecting. So hopefully you're here because you are someone you care about, live with mental health challenges, and that you're willing to keep an open mind. And if anything that Andrea and I are going to talk about today could be triggering for you, please make sure that you exercise self-care, take a break, leave. We're not going to be offended if you do that, because we're going to be talking about parents today, and often that could be quite a triggering topic for people. You're in the wrong place if you're seeking any kind of medical or diagnostic advice, because I know some people sometimes put in questions in the registration about medication, and that's definitely not something that we can respond to. And hopefully you're going to be able to keep an open mind about not only mental health, but also parenting challenges, because we're not here to dump on our parents or to complain about them. We're here to really explore the topic of what we needed, when we were first diagnosed, and what could be great supports for teens or young adults with mental health challenges. We definitely don't have all the answers or a quick fix. And if you do have any urgent issues that need professional support, please seek that as soon as possible. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing the PowerPoint, and we're going to just kind of have a free-flowing discussion. And I'm just going to spotlight Andrea and myself for everybody so that you can see us clearly. There we go. Awesome. Hi, Andrea.
Hi, how's it going today? Well, I know how it's going today. You're feeling a little bit stressed. I have little doggies as well, so don't worry, things are going to work out.
Yeah, I totally have faith that it's going to work out. Thank you for saying that. And often I think when you name the emotion, it's much better, because if I don't name the emotion that I'm experiencing, all of you will actually feel it energetically, but you're not going to know why or what's happening. So as soon as I name it, then you're going to know, okay, that's what Yolanda is carrying, and that kind of just clears it from our group together. So, and I know you're all wishing him well. And you're like, come on, Didi. He has a GPS tracker, so we're not as worried, but he is in a kind of like a nature area. So, anyways, back to us about what we wish our parents knew. So is it okay, Andrea, for you to kickstart that? If you want to talk about something that, you wish your parents knew?
Yeah, it's a big question. There's a lot of things that I wish my parents knew for sure. Relatives, friends, etc. I think that all weaves into the people who care about us and love us and want to support. But I could definitely start with my parents. So as Yolanda mentioned, I was diagnosed at the age of 25 years old with bipolar disorder. I was just a little bit of background about my condition and what happened. I was house sitting for a friend. I didn't know anything was wrong. I went into a deep psychosis where I started seeing things, hearing things, believing things that weren't real, and hit a major mania of elevated mood and landed in the hospital for my first hospitalization when I lived in Ottawa at the first time. Tried to rebuild, and I just couldn't. And then I attempted to take my life, but I survived, luckily. And the reason why I bring this in is because of the reactions of my parents and what happened after that time. So I obviously was hospitalized a second time, and began a really amazing healing journey after that. And so that's when Stigma Free Society came to fruition. So keeping to topic, it's really hard for me to admit this particular incident because I would never say anything negative about my father. He raised me from the age of 8 to 16 when my parents were divorced. We were very close. I always loved my dad. We had a child lawyer when our parents were divorcing, and we got to choose who we wanted to go with. And there was no question. I love my mom, but my sister went with my mother and I went with my father. And strangely enough, at the time, my mother was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And later in life, 20 years later, diagnosed with schizoaffective disorder. So just to say about dad, we have a great relationship now. We talk every single week. He lives about 3 hours from me. We have 1 to 2 hour conversations. But I was talking about ending my life with my best friend back when I was 25. And she didn't know what to do. So she called my dad. And I'll always remember my father calling me and saying, "What is going on with you?" in a very angry voice. And no empathy, no understanding, no authentic conversation took place there. And he said, "You better get your crap together," and hung up. And so I look back now at that time and I forgive my father. But I realized he was very angry because he was scared and he didn't know what to do. So, yeah, that's a pretty strong memory for me, Yolanda.
Yeah. Wow. And strong words too from your father, someone you loved so much. I mean, there's so many pieces of what you shared that would never happen today, right? Like nobody makes their kids choose who who they should be with anymore, but it's obvious that you really loved your dad and you looked up to him, and then he said what he said. um yeah, that must have been such a difficult time for you.
Yeah, it definitely was, because it is what ended up driving me over the edge the next day.
Yeah.
And I never did have that conversation with my dad. But what I wish he knew, coming back to this topic, is that I was sick and I just really needed professional medical help.
Yeah.
I wish that my parents were educated about mental health, about the system, about what can be done for somebody who is suffering. I feel like there is a lot of stigma, which is a reason why I co-founded Stigma Free Society in 2016 after the Bipolar Disorder Society, because a lot of people feel they can't talk about it or they don't know how to talk about it. So, yeah,
Mhm.
I definitely wish there was that education and that piece around action. That would have been something that would have tremendously helped me at the time, because I didn't know that there was help. I had no idea about resources or doctors or anything of the sort. I had nobody to advocate for me. I was just very sick. I could barely grocery shop. I couldn't cook for myself. Taking a shower felt like climbing Mount Everest. And so, how was I even supposed to be able to be in the headspace of taking care of me? I think that's when I really would have loved for my parents and my loved ones, to take care of me, and because I couldn't do it.
Yeah. And you're so not alone in that kind of struggle when you are like, I even just today, I was talking to my husband. He was making fun of my daughter yesterday for not wanting to take a shower. Like, kids, they don't like to take showers. And I said, you shouldn't say that to her, because I said, sometimes I don't take a shower. Like, she hasn't showered in like 4 days or something because she just doesn't feel like it. And I said, but sometimes, when I'm down, I may not shower for like 7 days. And are you saying that I'm disgusting? Because that is not, and it's just that lack of compassion. And I'm always so present to what somebody could be going through now because of what I've gone through. And but someone who is like very like neural normative, like they don't really think that way. um
Yeah.
so yeah, and I shared with Andrea about this with about my parents as well. But first, I do want to say that I don't hold any um negative feelings or grudges against my parents anymore. I've definitely done a lot of work to let go of those things. Actually, both Andrea and I did Landmark, and that was a huge part of how I was able to let go. And I kind of made my parents do Landmark as well. But I don't know if they actually really like did it the way that it's meant to be done. And I know that they tried their best given their own traumas, their own experiences. So I just want to say that first. But that being said, I had a similar experience to Andrea, where when I first had the symptoms of major depression, I was alone in university. My parents were traveling in China, and I was having suicidal ideation, very severe. And my parents said to me, like, don't tell anyone, don't go to the, don't go to the doctors, don't tell your roommates, don't tell anyone, but just don't do anything stupid either. And at the time I was like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Like, don't do anything stupid. But it was the fact that they said, you can't tell anybody, if you tell anyone, people are going to look at you funny, and you're really going to be ostracized, and this could really ruin the rest of your life. And coming from an Asian background, that all made sense to me as well, because we don't share a lot of negative things. Even not even with family, we might not even share. And they didn't tell anyone in my family that I got sick. And that when I actually got the correct diagnosis of bipolar disorder, it was even more shameful. And so definitely no one knew about it. And I even said to my parents, I was like, shouldn't you tell my cousins? Like, what if there's some kind of hereditary component? Shouldn't they know? Like, or my aunts and uncles? And they were like, no, we can't tell anybody. We don't want people to look at you differently now. And so I think what I wish they had known is that living with bipolar disorder, or the diagnosis, does not end my life as I know it. And there is no shame in this. And if you are more open about it, like Andrea and I are now, you actually feel so much more free and courageous, and you just don't see it as a flaw. I shared this, I think, a few weeks ago, but I have this little vase in front of me all the time. It's a kintsugi art, and it's the Japanese art of repairing ceramics. So the broken ceramics are not thrown away, but they are fused together again using gold. And this is so symbolic of my life. Now I don't hide the scars anymore. I celebrate them. Bipolar disorder actually makes me stronger and not weaker. And the concept of being beautifully unbroken is actually now like my keynote topic that I deliver to companies. I'm going to be doing it at a gala for Hanfuk in June. And I think it's just the message that I want to get across, that Andrea has been working on for many years in her work, about just ending the stigma about bipolar disorder or any kind of mental health challenges. So all that being said, one thing that I wish my parents knew is that it's not shameful to live with bipolar disorder or any kind of mental illness. Just because we can't see it, it doesn't mean that it's bad or doesn't make you broken. And sharing about it has been the most amazing part of my healing journey. And yeah, so I just wish that they knew that as well.
Yeah.
So Andrea, is there anything else or another thing that you wish your parents knew?
Yeah, I like to actually go to my sister because
Sure.
I feel, yeah. My sister and I, we're very different. I'm more that emotional, sensitive type, and I like to cry and feel, and music brings me to tears, and just the way that I am. And my sister's very logical, very medical. She was a pharmaceutical technician. Just, we're so different in that way, and our personalities and the way that we think and feel. And I remember being hospitalized, obviously, as I mentioned, twice, and I did not once hear from my sister. No phone call, absolutely nothing. And just like my parents, I hold no ill will towards my sister. I think she's an amazing and astounding human being, and our friendship is stronger than it's ever been at this current time. But I do remember feeling really alone. And when I was in the hospital quite far away on the other end of the country, from my parents, from my sister, my dad did call a few times. That was before the incident that I mentioned before. But with my sister, eventually, I think a year later, ended up talking to her. And I said, "Why didn't you call me?" And she said, "I was talking to the nurse the whole time, checking in on you, making sure that you are okay." And I'm like, "Why aren't you talking to me as well?" Right? I think one of the things with our relatives and our friends, family, parents, is that for me personally, I felt very alone in a lot of those moments. And even a 2-minute phone call, just simply giving me a call saying, "I'm thinking about you. I love you. I can't be there right now in person, but I definitely, you're on my mind. And if you need me, reach out." And that would have been the world to definitely have that. My mother having a mental illness, she was quite understanding. And one of the things that she learned from me was that it is okay to make your own healing regime, whether that's a medication regime for some people, it may not be. But for my mom, she had breakdowns every couple of years without medication. And when she'd be on medication, she would be great for a long time. And then she felt the internal stigma, and she felt that she was weak because she was taking medications. And I think a lot of us with bipolar disorder have felt that. I know I personally have gone through that in the past, and look where it landed me during my second hospitalization. But everybody has their own path, and I want to emphasize that. But one really great thing, talking about parents, with my mother and myself having bipolar disorder and her at the time being diagnosed with the same mental illness, she said she went and got counseling, and she went and saw a doctor. And I said, "Wow, what changed?" She said, because you do these things and you take care of yourself." And I'm really inspired. And then to see my mother at 50 years old being diagnosed at 23 and not having really reached out for help or even admitted that, she had a serious mental illness was very inspiring. It was amazing. So yeah, that's something that I remember fondly for sure. And mom and I are super close now. We talk every day because my mother is like that, even if the call is a few minutes. But yeah, I love her tremendously. And our relationship, due to our commonality of having mental illness, has brought us closer. And so that's been a really beautiful experience.
Yeah, that's really great that you not only helped yourself, but you also influenced the way your mom sees things, and she is better off for it. So that must make you feel proud, right?
Yeah, it makes me feel that if I can help my mom in any situation, then I'm happy to do that. My stepfather passed away 2.5 years ago, and we just thought that with my mother's mental health and mental illness, that she would just fall apart and then everything would be terrible and she'd end up in the hospital. And you know what? With her self-care regime, with everything that she was doing to take care of her mental health, for her medications, she made it through, and she's very strong. She didn't fall, she kept going. And I recently had to move my mother into a care home. But she's very happy there because she says it's like a hotel and people bring her like, she rings the bell and she gets cheese and crackers.
I guess that doesn't happen at home, right? Like if you ring the bell at home, the
Yeah.
cheese crackers don't come.
Yeah, she has a lot of, physical disabilities now. And with the mental health thing is doing well. So yeah,
Yeah.
a good relationship with our parents. It's like such a gift when we are able to have that. And I really love, Yolanda, when you were talking about holding no ill will against your parents, because for myself too, yes, doing the Landmark Forum seminar was very healing. And I created a lot of stories around why my parents did the things that they did, why my father and that incident. I don't even feel, funny enough, the need to go and talk to my dad about that and to bring
Yeah.
that up after 20 years, and to like, I've made peace with that and forgiveness in my heart. And I just love enjoying his company, and he's getting older too. So it's just things happen, and I feel for myself, I've come to a really beautiful place of forgiveness of my whole past. And so that feels really good.
Yeah. No, that's really great. And I'm really happy for you. I'm not, unfortunately, I'm not in the same place with my parents at the moment. But it's so nice to hear that you can get there, right? So thank you for sharing that. And yeah, and Samara and Marilyn both commented, this is very beautiful, and you showed by example what you wish your parents would know for your mom. And it's so important to have, acceptance and, loving self-care. I think it's so key. Thank you, Marilyn, for sharing that too. So another thing I think I wish my parents knew when I first got diagnosed is the importance of therapy. So my dad is a scientist. He was a PhD in cancer research, and he worked for the last 25 years for a pharmaceutical company in research. So he's definitely all about medication. And I had a lot of shame around taking medication, but my dad really helped me to overcome that. And so I was really okay with taking medication, but nobody was okay with therapy. And for me, being somebody who is very empathetic, very emotional, I'm definitely a highly sensitive person. I'm an HSP. All of these things actually I would have really benefited from therapy and talking through some of the stories that I had, or some of the just really ruminating thoughts. And medication alone is not enough, but there's a lot of resistance from my parents for therapy. Even till today, my mom still says that my therapist is the reason we're not as close anymore. And that cannot be further from the truth. So I never really had access to therapy when I was younger. When I was first diagnosed, even after all the different suicidal, I didn't have any, I don't think I had any actual attempts, but like come very close. I would be driving and I would think, it would just be very dark, scary thoughts. But I never really had the kind of, I think, therapeutic support that I could have really benefited from. But of course, that comes from their own upbringing. Therapy is not something that they had any access to, in communist China. Like that's where they grew up, and they don't have that. It's not a common concept. So it took a long time for me to access therapy, and when I did, it made just like, that's when I think I really started to get better.
Mhm.
They found my dog. Oh my gosh, I just got the message.
I knew it.
Oh goodness. This little guy, he has my heart and he is trying to kill me. Like it's just, oh my God. They found him in the bushes in the mountain, like in the hills. Whew. I think he doesn't like to be with other people. I think that's probably part of the reason he was escaping. He was probably trying to come back home, to try to find us. But yeah, that was really good. And so what about you, Andrea? Like, what's your kind of like, how did you get, I'm sure you've used therapy as well. Like, how did you connect with therapy? Was that something that, you found yourself or?
Yeah. So when I was hospitalized for my suicide attempt in Victoria, for the second time for second hospitalization, that's when I got all the care. Right. And it seemed like once that crisis hit and I'm in the Eric Martin Pavilion at the time for 1 month. So
Hmm.
that's when I met an amazing psychiatrist, Dr. Song. And Dr. Song has been my psychiatrist now for 18 years. I finally met somebody who could help me see the light again. When I met him in that hospital, I felt like a drowned rat. I was just, hadn't showered in days. I couldn't do anything. It was just this weakness. I felt horrible. And when he came up to me, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Hey, you doing okay?" And it was just this genuine, authentic, he cared right away how I was doing. And so after speaking with him and telling him about my life, I remember doing a follow-up office visit with him within the psychiatric facility. And he said, "Wow, you're pretty smart, eh?" I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "You have a degree in this and you ran for nomination for member of parliament. And yeah, I know quite a bit about you." And I was like, "Yeah, well, he reminded me, you know what? I am smart." And I completely was always telling myself that I wasn't, and I had no faith in myself anymore, in any of my abilities, and thought that with the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, that was my demise. I was going to be messed up like my mom. Like that was what was the voice that was talking in my head saying, "You can't have an extraordinary life. You can't have a good life." And he helped me see that I could. And but he did said, "We're going to get you on a new medication regime." And I was like, "No, absolutely not. I'm not doing this again." It made me gain 30 pounds, cystic acne, all of these really negative side effects. He says those things can balance out. He said, "Listen, is what you're doing working for you?" Then I realized, wow, I am the patient. He's the expert. He's the psychiatrist. And so it took a real humble moment to understand that I was going to listen to what he had to say. And that was the start of a really great relationship with my psychiatrist, who then, talking about therapy, ended up securing a psychiatric nurse for me. And the psychiatric nurse was an astounding woman who really loved her job, really ended up getting close to her patients. And I remember I did cognitive behavioral therapy, it's called. So replacing those negative thoughts with the truth and just really putting out there, okay, is this really happening or is this reality? And I learned a whole bunch of new skills. So it was really interesting. I also ended up learning about dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, which is generally used for people with borderline personality disorder, but it's also very good for bipolar disorder. And so it's about mindfulness and being in the moment. She made this big basket with me of scents, like smell, to see, to hear. All of these different items within this basket would ground me when I was in a moment of despair, because I was still experiencing bouts of psychosis for many years. And it took about 7 years for those medications to even out to be able to be where I am today. But like you said, Yolanda, it's not all about meds. It's about therapy. It's about, I did a lot of peer support groups. I created 3 peer support groups, similar to what you're doing with your circle. Yeah, so therapy has been key. I've always lived like 3 hours or more away from my parents and my family. I think I like being a little bit more detached and kind of doing my own thing and then seeing them once in a while. That's kind of how it's always been. So I've never really had discussions with them about me participating in therapy. It was just something that I knew in my heart that I needed to do for my wellness.
Yeah, what I loved about what you shared is, even in your worst moments, like you said, you use the words a drowning rat, like what a vivid image, right, of how you felt. I'm sure you didn't look like one, but that's how you felt inside to yourself. And in that moment, you met your psychiatrist, Dr. Song, that really came and was able to be that beacon for you. And then you found a great psychiatric nurse. So I just find that sometimes, even in our worst moments, it's when the light shines the brightest, right? It's darkest before the dawn, as they say. So I just put in the dialectical behavior therapy link from CAMH here for anyone who wants to look it up, which is, I think it does sound like something that would be really helpful as well. So one thing that, I kind of felt inspired to share after what you said is, for me, I think what really turned around my healing, yes, the medication is helpful. I'm never going to be off medication. I'm taking 3 different medications now, like to kind of round out my treatment. So I have lithium, carbamazepine, and fluoxetine. But to get here, over the past 10 years, I think I have been on 20 to 30 different medications, just as they're trying like different things and different side effects. It was quite the experience. So I'm really glad I'm on this routine now. I still have symptoms, mostly depressive symptoms, but I'm really grateful for at least this group of medication that's working for me. But what has really kind of transformed my healing is also been learning more about trauma, learning more about my own traumas, and validating them. And I think that's part of the reason why, after having my daughter, my relationship with my parents have actually gotten more strained. And I think partly is because becoming a parent yourself really triggers a lot of the deeply rooted traumas that you've experienced as a child. And your child almost holds up a mirror to you about them, and then you have to deal with them. And so for me, in dealing with these early childhood traumas that I don't even remember consciously, but it's stored somewhere in my body, and the reaction is very somatic as opposed to intellectual. And so that's been an exhausting but an interesting journey as well. So Andrea, I told you I'm in the compassionate inquiry training program with Dr. Gabor Mate, and he really helped me to release a lot of that in our like one-on-one session together. And I just wish I could see him like every day. I'm like, can you just be my therapist? Like, I know you have like an international book kind of like, friend, whatever, like enterprise, but I just need you to call me like every day just to check on me and help release more of that trauma. So I'm curious if you've done any like trauma kind of work as well, related or not related to your parents, but just like for yourself.
Well, for sure, I think I need to do some work in that area, but I'm writing my book and it's been very therapeutic. It's a memoir about my early years, my teen years, my diagnosis, creating the charity. It's been my dream. I've been writing this thing forever. But I did take a 4-month intensive writing course to work on it. So that was good. But anyway, right, I was writing about my childhood, and oh my goodness, all of these traumas and all of these memories are coming up, things that I really haven't thought about in decades. And one of the things I wanted to talk about today, just in having this conversation that I'm passionate about, is when our parents have mental illness. I like switching it around a little bit, because when I was a little girl at the age of 6, I would say, I'll always remember, and it's in my book, and that's how I ended up remembering it at all, was happening in the dining room, and I have my friend sleeping over with me in the bedroom, just the wall over, and I could hear voices. It's like my nan, my grandma, and I think my grandpa was there too, and my dad and my mom, and they were saying, Bridget, Bridget, to my mom, like trying to, it sounded like they were like sort of yelling at her. I'm like, she's in the same room. What's going on? I could hear what's going on. And they're like, she's not responding. And all of a sudden I could hear like ambulance cherries, like lights, screaming down the street. And they end up in my driveway. And I'm like 5 or 6 years old, wondering what is going on, except that, is my mom okay? And there was a lot of trauma with that for me to remember this time. And then I learned years later, when she was screaming and being taken away in a straitjacket. And then they flicked their cherries back, I call them cherries, the lights back on, and headed off with her to the psychiatric hospital. And I remember waking up the next day as a child and thinking, I'm not going to go outside. And my father didn't even explain what happened, because I think he didn't know what to say. And so, being at that loss for words, I totally do understand. But I said, what happened to mom? I don't know. They often would say, when she ended up in the hospital, because it happened, every year or two, they would say, she's sick, she'll be home in a few weeks. And that was it. And so that caused a lot of unknowns in my life as a child. And I ended up stigmatizing my mother, myself, because of those attitudes that were perpetuated within my family. And when they went through the divorce, my mom was very quick to be called an inadequate mother. And all I know, that when adults talked about the word bipolar, that it was bad. That's definitely what I knew as a child. And there was a moment where I didn't want my mom coming around to my graduation ceremony or things that were happening like that, because I was embarrassed about her. I cried a few years back and apologized to her. And she's like, what are you talking about? No, sweetie, like, I don't even know. Don't feel that way. But I carried this trauma and this guilt for a very long time for the way that I treated my mother. And I think, as children of, parents who have mental illness, we need to realize that it's not our fault how we react, as we're children, right? But I did carry that. And then as I grew older, I learned, and you know, especially with getting diagnosed with bipolar disorder myself, wow, that was when I was really able to relate to my mom and understand the hardships and the stigma that she went through. So yeah, it was, there's trauma there for sure. And I think I'm still working on that.
Well, we're like onions, right? It's kind of like a lifetime of peeling. It doesn't really stop. And one thing, about what you said, and why it's traumatic for you is, and this is Gabor Mate's definition of trauma. So it's not the event itself that causes trauma, is when you are alone with the event that happens to you. So it's actually what happens inside of you that because of the event that creates the trauma. So because you were alone with all the confusion as a 5, 6-year-old and your dad really not knowing how to explain it to you, or maybe he didn't even think it was necessary to explain it to you, which is the way I grew up. It's like need to know basis, which usually meant you don't need to know anything. Everything just happens around me and I never need to know anything. But what happens with that is there becomes a distrust that will develop in the child because we don't know what's happening. We make our own judgments, we make our own stories. And if we don't have the chance to, clear them up with Landmark or whatever other kind of courses that could help, we just live with them forever. And it just kind of stews inside of us and it rots, right? So yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I'm curious about something, if I may ask you, because you told me I could ask anything. So she did.
Yeah, sure.
No, this is not, it's actually just my own, recently I've noticed there's been a pattern of people, especially women who live with bipolar disorder. I've just started to notice there is a pattern in their own early childhood experiences. So, and I don't know, this is definitely not a scientific study in like any means, it's just something I've seen. So there's like maybe 4 or 5 different things that I've noticed tend to happen with people living with bipolar disorder. So I'm going to just name them. And I'm curious if you've experienced them, whatever you're, willing to share about. So one, I noticed that there usually is some kind of early attachment injury from the primary caregiver. And that's one. So the second one is there's parentification that occurred with one or both parents. What that means is one or both parents relied on you as emotional support, and they shared too much with you about their lives, where children are not meant to know. And there are instances of physical or sexual abuse. And these women also tended to have anxious attachment styles, which means whether it's from abandonment, whether it's from the early attachment injuries. And lastly, they tend to have parents who deal with extreme perfectionism, and praise only occurred for achievement, and they also cultivated perfectionism in their own children. So I have all 5. Check, 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 check. But I've seen this in many, many women who live with bipolar disorder. So just curious, what do you think?
Yeah. What's the first one? Because that was the one that resonated as I was listening to all of them.
Early attachment injury from the caregiver. So you were separated from your mom from a very early age, pre-verbal. So before you were able to speak, there was some kind of separation that happened.
Yeah, I would say none of those then, if that's what the first one means. But when you were talking about that first one, the divorce of my family was devastating for me at 7. And I know it wasn't, the attachment before I was able to talk, but I feel that was a very defining moment for me of trauma and affected my whole life. There was a lot of stigma around divorce in the 1980s, like the early to mid 80s, even in the late, I believe. And I remember walking down the street and hiding my face. And one of my friends that I used to hang out with quite a bit, because I was between my mom and my dad for quite some time, and she said, "Andrea, where have you been?" And I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed because my family wasn't together, and on our beautiful street, we were the only ones who were divorced. And so we ended up selling, my parents ended up selling our family home. I'd cry in bed looking at my family photo in my little Bible at the time, and I would cry every night. So I think that particularly, like my mother was my main caregiver. My father worked. Me and my mom were actually very, very close when I was a child, but the biggest reason why I ended up choosing dad is I didn't want him to be alone.
Yeah.
And yeah, and my sister I knew would go with my mom as they were super close. I love both my parents, but that was the time when, I ended up getting detached from my main caregiver, was my mother.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I know, like, I'm not trying to therapize you, but one thing I have learned is that the fact that you felt responsible for your dad in some way as a child, that could have been a sign of parentification in some way. Maybe you
For
don't remember,
sure.
or maybe you didn't notice, but how would a child feel that kind of responsibility? Why would they, right? So that's something. And I have to apologize. I totally lost track of time and I forgot to ask if there are questions from our group here because I'm so engrossed in the talk with Andrea. So I'm going to stop talking. Does anyone have any questions that they want to ask Andrea or myself? I mean, if not, then I shouldn't feel so bad. But, oh, Marilyn, you have a question? Yeah.
It's not a question. I just want to say thank you. It's tremendous. I was going to have a question or a point, and then the one or the other would say it. But I said, oh my God, right on. So I'm very happy listening to what you're sharing today. Not that those occurred, but that you're so generous with your shares to help me feel not so alone. The peer therapy is something I left out a lot of in my life. And I do not have, I should probably say, because you weren't here last week, Andrea, when I said I don't have bipolar, although sometimes I think my symptoms are very similar. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder, but severely where it made me very disabled and unable to work, to make a living. So serious levels of it, but very similar to what you guys are talking about, especially when you started talking about the traumas in your early childhood. And sometimes I think it's just a matter of the diagnosis being different, but the similar is the same thing at times. I'm almost like it's so similar at times. But thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for sharing as you do. It's very helpful.
You're welcome. Thanks, Marilyn.
Thank you, Marilyn. Well, with that, I just want to say thank you so much, Andrea, for your generosity, for being here. Do you want to share a little bit before we go, just about your charity work and if there's anything we can do to support your causes?
Yeah, just please visit stigmafreesociety.com. We have a number of programs. We serve remote and rural communities with our toolkit. It's a hub online where rural families, youth can get the mental health information and resources they need. Also in those communities, we provide peer support training so that people in rural communities can then go back to their own communities and start those peer support groups. And then, of course, youth is our biggest focus. School counselors and teachers. We have a student mental health toolkit, which families can use as well. You can see our program at stigmafreesociety.com, but to access it directly, studentmentalhealthtoolkit.com. And this is our signature program, and I hope you will check it out and learn more about us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. So I put both of those links in the chat. And I'm also going to put them in the follow-up email when I send out the replay as well. So
Great.
Thank you so much. And I'm also going to be starting the Courage Circle for caregivers. And as usual, I won't have time to share the slide, but I'm excited to be able to start that really soon. And I'm going to send that in a replay email as well. So thank you for being here with us. Thank you, Andrea, and have a beautiful day. Bye.
Okay, bye.